Ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute privilege and pleasure to be hosting an important conversation on the topic of mentoring in support of our new edition of Mentoring at Sea. I say important, we're joined today by two people that know a thing or two about this topic. There is with me here today the author of Mentoring at Sea, Captain André LeGoubin, and joining him is Katharine Johns, a member of our Younger Members Council, and also the first reader of our new edition, the second edition of Mentoring at Sea. So thank you both for joining me today. André, would you like to spend a moment or two just introducing yourself to our audience?
Thanks very much, Stephen. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you here in London again, back amongst friends, and on, what is for me a really special occasion. I don't consider myself a professional author. I'm just a seafarer that has a passion about mentoring. And I've had so much support from the Nautical Institute over the last, 14 years now. 12 years since the last book, or the first book came out, and now 12 years on, here we are with the second edition. The 10-minute challenge goes on. The Nautical Institute partnered with me even before the book was written to produce it, taken from my master's degree thesis. It developed into the book, and we've moved on together over the years. It's been fantastic support from here and globally, in fact, from the members who've read the first book and implement mentoring on these ships. So, really today here with the second edition, this is really, really special for me. Great to be here.
Thank you. And Katharine, a few words.
I was really excited as a member of the Younger Members Council to be asked to read this book and partake in this. I got my copy about a week ago, and I have carried it everywhere with me, reading it, and it's dog-eared and coming, just well worn, and it has so many pearls of wisdom, and I was very honored to just be a part of this, and yeah.
I hope you liked it.
I loved it.
Thank goodness for that.
Couldn't put it down, hence the reason.
No, that's lovely. I'm really glad about that.
Yeah.
Well, look, thank you both for flying into London and being part of this really special event and joining us here today. We got lots of questions to get through. I know our viewers out there will be really interested in some of the answers and some of the discussion we've got around the topic of mentoring and the content of the book, a bit of a flavour of what's in those covers and what people can expect. So we'll come on to that. I will be sharing at the end of this recording details with you all of how to get a copy of this book and some more information on how to contact us if you would like to share any thoughts or feedback. So look out for that at the end. Now, I did mention right at the beginning that this was a conversation. And the reason it's a conversation instead of a webinar or a presentation, as we would often do with our other books, is because a conversation is what is consistently been our author's aim in writing this book, both the first edition way back in 2012 and the new edition just launched. So I'd like to start, if I may, with you both by talking about that conversation. And I know it's been your consistent aim, André, and I just wonder to what extent you think that conversation that you've been trying to engage people in since 2012, to what extent has that landed? How much is mentoring now in people's minds at sea, and how much of it do you now see going on?
It's interesting, Stephen, because when you think back to 2012, we didn't talk a lot about mentoring in those days. And now it's a word you hear pretty much at every conference, certainly in the ones I've been to as president of the NI. Mentoring was mentioned very often, not just by me. Mentoring is a word we use at sea now. We need mentoring. We do this through mentoring. We do that through mentoring. So would it be arrogant for me to say that it's because of the book? It's hard to say. It's certainly not because of the book. But the amount of work the Nautical Institute has put into this project since 2012 with the videos, with the publishing of the book, and really with the continuing of the conversation about mentoring. There is no doubt at sea, and I'm an active seafarer. I'm going back to sea next week. Mentoring is mentioned on ships all the time now. So I think it has made a difference. And that was my aim. people are talking about mentoring.
Yeah, indeed. And Katharine, is that, you're at sea, you're working in the Canadian Coast Guard, you go away on tours of duty. Is that your lived experience, that mentoring is visible, is spoken about, is a topic of discussion, is considered important at sea today?
Very much so. There's only so much you can have in a regimented institution for training and things like that. So much of what we do at sea is learned through skills and trade. And so mentoring is definitely a two-way street. And I'm finding a lot of places I go, it can be lumped into things like familiarization. It can be lumped into things that are more formal in that sort of aspect, but also very informal when you're on the bridge, when you're in the mess talking, when you're doing other things like that. It's very much a culture that is in today's, at least my experience, seafarers world.
And I would say particularly for the new generation of seafarers. And by that, what I mean is when the first book came out in 2012, we had Seafarers at Sea then. But if you think the cadets and the very junior officers, when the first book came out 12 years later, they're now the senior officers on board, or in the offices ashore, with interest in seagoing ships. So we've pretty much a generation here, perhaps not a physical generation, but certainly a generation at sea. 12 years at sea, you go from third mate to master, or fourth engineer to chief engineer. And I think particularly I see with the new generation seafarers that they are far more engaged with mentoring and the need for mentoring.
That's really nice to hear that younger seafarers are really engaged with this and that they're pursuing it and championing it themselves. Is this support and is this traction that we're seeing for mentoring, is it just a shipboard phenomenon, or is it joined up? Are we seeing the support from shoreside management, from the people that run the ships from shore? Are they behind this? Are they supporting it? Or is this fairly isolated and existing only out there on board?
That's hard to sort of answer because we really don't know. I see it as a seafarer, as an active seafarer, I see it on board the ship, but I don't know the support that there is for it. I don't believe it's there yet. Right. I have to be honest. Right. When the first book came out, companies bought an awful lot of copies. We were delighted with the response, and they put them on their ships and that. But as I say, we've moved on from there, and so much has changed since the first book. But I'm still struggling to get companies to engage with this, to understand the concept, and to allow it to go on board without having any sort of control on it. Because what we don't want is companies controlling mentoring, auditing, checklists, things like that. That is the absolute death knell for mentoring on board. And we'll come to talk more about what mentoring actually is, or the concept that we're promoting. But I'm not seeing that. And I particularly want to mention here, we need superintendents that go on board ships, that visit ships, to engage with this concept. We appealed to you 12 years ago, and we're appealing again. Please, you are the link between ship and shore. Promote mentoring on board, encourage it, and acknowledge it when you see it happening. Just don't audit it or checklist it.
Indeed. Please. And Katharine, you're at sea, you're working in a company right now, you're an active seafarer. Do you see that link between shoreside support for mentoring and what's taking place on board? Is it explicit from the company, the support, is that explicit, or is that something just managed between different ships within the company?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's managed in the ship. Mm-hmm. And if requested by shoreside, it can be facilitated if there's anything needed from shoreside. And shoreside can also help and wants that to be something. I think sometimes there's a disconnect on how can we marry what shoreside wants to support and how it actually comes into practice on ship. And yes, we don't want that regimented, exactly what André said, but how best can we facilitate that conversation so that people on ship know that they have that support from shore, and people on shore realize how important on ship it is, that it's not just you have a ticket, ergo you can do something, right? You need the skills to back it up and the experiential knowledge to be able to facilitate that.
We'll come on to some of the barriers to mentoring in a second, but before we do, what I'd like to do is to take you both right back to the beginning and ask you both about the significant mentors in your own careers. If you were to think about somebody, a mentor in your own career who stands out for the right reasons, did you realise at the time that they were a mentor? Did you realise at the time you were a mentee? And did they see themselves as a mentor? Where in your own careers do you recognise mentoring beginning for you?
Oh my goodness, for me, I was born on the island of Sark in the Channel Islands. It's a small island, 3 miles by 1.5, 500 people, and only serviced by ship. When I was 11, my whole family moved to the island of Guernsey, 25 square miles, much bigger island. We had cars on that one. And there was a small ship running between Guernsey and Sark. And I know you've seen the pictures of the ship so many times, Stephen, as I've talked about mentoring. The captain of that ship, it was 103 feet long. It carried 100 tons of cargo. It was the sole supplier of all the goods to the island. We carried everything from dead people to livestock, fuel, and 138 passengers. The master of the vessel was a Southern Irishman who'd run away to sea sometime before the Second World War, I understand. He didn't have children, but I got to know him, and he let me, from the age of 12, go on board his ship as a deck boy. And from the age of 12, I sailed with him Saturdays and my school vacations, running between Guernsey and Sark, an hour's trip. He was a really traditional seafarer, very strict man, very principled, lovely guy. And basically, he was my mentor. I learned to steer the ship. I used to have to stand on a beer crate. It was this wooden box that used to carry beer bottles. It was empty. I wasn't tall enough to see into the magnetic compass. Wow. When I learned to steer. So he used to say to me in his Southern Irish drawl, go and get your box. And I'd go and get my box, and I'd stand on that and steer the ship. Great big John Wayne steering wheel. Wow. And gradually, as I got older and more confident, he let me do more and more. And when I was about 15, 16, he signed me on as ordinary seaman. And then he let me do more and more of the control of the vessel until he actually let me berth it. And I was berthing this little ship at the age of 16, something like that. That man was a true mentor. He had no reason to do this, just a passion for the sea and a passion for passing experiential knowledge on. He gave me the foundation of knowledge that I have built on and got to where I am now. And that was my mentor, Captain Healy.
The power of one person.
Ah, fantastic. I mean, there's been many more in my life, right up until recently. We all have mentors. We all have people who support us. But he really was the one who got me started.
Stands out.
Yeah.
Incredible. Katharine?
One of the most significant mentors for me was a captain I had for an extended period of time, and he was very knowledgeable about his craft. He didn't necessarily have really long, in-depth conversations that you would have about things, but for me, I was a junior officer, I'd be on the bridge, and he would come up and he'd kind of just poke around and look at things like, oh, what's the AIS set to, and what's this, and what are your settings on this? And he'd kind of poke around, and I would, after a while, start following him and see, okay, what is it he's checking for? What is it he's tweaking? How is he improving the picture and the navigation of the ship and the bridge and everything? And then that started cueing me into a lot of, oh, this is really important, or I'd forgotten this, or this is how this can be improved. And so it was less of a conversation, more of an observation of things that he was kind of showing, and then I'd ask a question, and then he'd go into a little bit of a, oh, well, this is really important because this is how it leads into this, and this is what could potentially happen if you don't have this set right. And that to me is how I built a lot of my foundation as like a navigator in a very, you have to do things a certain way, or you can have multiple ways to do it, but how can you be safe in what you're doing and make sure that everyone on board is safe, right?
Did you feel he was challenging you to find things that you hadn't seen, or was he actually helping you?
I think it was a bit of both. And I think I've talked to some other mariners who have sailed with him, and it just didn't land the same way with them. But for me, I was just soaking it in. I was so thrilled to be able to work with him as long as I did, and to be able to pick up as much as I did, because very knowledgeable captain.
It's great to hear, in both cases, these people just setting great examples to you both very early on in your career, and it's been so impactful that you remember it with such clarity now.
I think what I would say as well, Stephen, sorry to jump in, but there are also mentors in our lives who have just come into our life, passed on a piece of knowledge and moved on, and we've never seen them again. And I think, if we really reflect on our lives and how we've changed and that, we've all got a number of these. I can think, and in fact, if you read the book, I mention a number of these mentors that have affected me, particularly one going through the Gibraltar Strait you'll read about in the book, but a captain who said to us that he could never make a teacher, and then gave me some profound knowledge about how to navigate by radar through a very busy strait. He was just a brilliant teacher for the man who couldn't teach. And yet I never saw him again. I sailed with him once as a cadet, not for terribly long, but he passed on that gem of wisdom to me, which has stayed with me right through my career.
Interesting. And you talk about knowledge there. I'm going to quote a line from the book here, which I particularly liked. You say that in life, experiences can be good or bad, good and bad. But the knowledge that flows from those experiences can only ever be good. And we're able to, pass that on and let others benefit from that. So my question is, we all have in our lives, we all have experiences and knowledge that flows from it. So therefore, can anybody be a mentor, or is the mentor somebody that is trained to be such, and do they have any qualifications? Who is this person that we call a mentor?
I believe anyone can be a mentor. Anyone can pass on a piece of knowledge. There's a number of things to this, but it's funny. I think of a couple of captains that I really couldn't stand. They were awful, yet they still passed on knowledge. They didn't do it intentionally, but they still passed on knowledge. And I often think, were they mentors? No, I don't think they were, because they weren't doing it. I think there has to be, first thing, there has to be a desire to pass knowledge, to be a mentor. And then from the mentee, there has to be a need. A giver and a taker, if you like, if that makes sense. I think you have to have that. But somebody who will share something. Generally it's something they're very good at, that they do well, that they're confident in doing, but they will share it. Now, how we get that knowledge and how it takes sometimes a lot more encouraging with some. Some people do this very naturally, some people don't. But I think most people, if not all, most people can be mentors.
And building on that theme, is there anybody in your mind, Katharine, that you think would not be suited to being a mentor? A type or a profile of person?
I think he mentioned it earlier, you have to want to be a mentor. So if you aren't willing to do that, I don't think you'd be a very good one, i.e. if it was mandated and someone wasn't buying into the concept and didn't really want to pass stuff down, I don't think they'd make a great mentor. But I do think you can learn from everybody, even if that's what I don't want to do. And then the key is to write it down so you remember in 10 years not to do what you don't want to be doing, right? So there is something to be learned about all situations. It's just what can you take from it and what you can't. So when it comes to mentoring, yes, you can have people that aren't good mentors or don't want to learn, but you can still learn things from them. and reflect and pass it on.
And that comes down again to the concept that I'm talking about, that experience can be good and bad. Because I think we've probably all of us, as we've sailed, we remember thinking, God, when I get to be captain, I'm not going to be like you, but we remember those experiences. And perhaps when we get to be master, we remember that. We remember that how you felt so belittled by that captain on the bridge in front of everybody because you'd made a mistake. And you don't do that with somebody else. You learned. It was a bad experience, but good knowledge came out of that. And now in your life, you're sharing that good knowledge. If I have to correct somebody, I'm going to take you out on the bridge wing. We're going to go away from everybody, and we're going to have a chat about this because that's my job. I've got to now teach you, but I'm not doing it in front of people. And we learned that from that bad experience. It became good knowledge because we've reflected on it, we've thought about it. It's become experiential knowledge.
That's gold, and I think our viewers will really appreciate those different perspectives in the answers there. You've spoken about the mentors in your own lives, and we've spoken about passing knowledge on. For the viewers out there, for people that might not be completely clear or sure, what is mentoring? What are the boundaries of mentoring? When does mentoring become coaching or training? We talk about mentoring, and I think we all have a grasp of what we think it is, but in your views, in your minds, what is mentoring?
This has been a discussion that has been ongoing for 14 years. What is mentoring? Just a short question.
Just a short answer.
Yeah. Mentoring is the transfer of experiential knowledge. It's the passing of experiential knowledge. But where is the boundary between a teacher, a coach, and a mentor? I see it as that when you're a mentor, there is no designated reward for what you're for what you're doing, for passing on this knowledge. Nobody is going to say there's an extra $50 in your paycheck, André. Thanks for doing that. There is rewards, and sometimes they're huge, and we'll come on to that probably in a little while. But there is no designated reward. I think that's one big difference between coaching and between teaching. And the other is that coaches and teachers are not living in the same environment. You see, we're talking here of mentoring at sea. We're on a ship. We're within the same environment. We're living together. We're working together. We're taking that ship from A to B. And we're also passing our knowledge on. And that's a big difference. A coach will come in, pass knowledge on, and go away. A teacher who gets paid for what they're doing, and coaches get rewarded as well, will come in, do their job, and go away. This isn't a job. This is a passion. This is just something we do because we want to. We're passing on. We're sharing our knowledge. And I think that's the big difference, is the environment we're doing it in.
So André, your book refers to the 10-minute challenge. For our viewers out there that might not be familiar with the 10-minute challenge, and in the new edition, the subtitle is the 10-minute challenge goes on. Can you tell us what the 10-minute challenge is?
Certainly. Nothing in my book, nothing I am advocating with mentoring is going to take more than 10 minutes. That's incredibly important. If you work it out, it's 172 of your day, working on a 12-hour day. 10 minutes, the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. That's all it is, because we are so busy at sea. I mean, I talk about mentoring, and one of the big things that's always thrown back at me is I haven't got time for all that. We'd love to do that, but we haven't got time. And that's why we have to incorporate it as a culture on board our ships and into our daily lives, as a way of life. If you're doing something, have somebody with you. It doesn't really matter, if it's a third mate, second mate, or chief mate, in the engine room, fourth, third, second, even a fitter, AB, bosun, it doesn't matter. We're sharing knowledge. We're passing it on. But the 10-minute challenge is incredibly important because that is the extra it takes maybe to do a bit of research, maybe a period of reflection, 10 minutes just reflecting, 10 minutes extra if you've let the chief mate anchor the ship, maybe, and you've mentored him on that. It might take you 10 minutes just to debrief the whole operation, no more than that. So nothing I am advocating in this book is going to take you more than 10 minutes, and that's the 10-minute challenge, mentoring in 10 minutes. It's not a long-term thing.
Good. Let's test that theory. Katharine, is 10 minutes long enough? Do you get 10 minutes every day to be able to mentor someone at sea? You know, you're at the sharp end, you're on board. Is 10 minutes adequate?
I think 10 minutes is doable because of the compound effect. 10 minutes every day, repeated on board a ship, you're going to gain a wealth of knowledge, or give a wealth of knowledge depending on what side of that relationship you're on. And I realize it can be 10 minutes if you're really busy. Today's mariners, there's a whole lot we have to do that's not just navigating, or not just in the engine room, or not just your core duty. There's so much paperwork involved and everything else in today's society. So it can be challenging sometimes to find that 10 minutes. And some people are also, maybe they're an introvert and you have so much forced socialization when you're on a ship that you have to interact with other people. And so for their break, they want to go back to their cabin and just be by themselves. They don't necessarily want to hang out in the mess and have a cup of tea with everyone. So if you can take that 10 minutes and be with someone throughout their working day for a little bit at a time, to be able to partake that knowledge and give that knowledge, it can cause such a huge difference over the course of your career. 10 minutes every day, regardless of which side of that relationship you're on. I think it's doable. I think you have to want to do it though.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
So
good.
I'm going to be a bit provocative here. You've both said that mentoring takes a bit of time, a bit of effort, a bit of dedication, and all for no designated reward. So my question is, what's in it for me? I've got to do all of this and I'm going to get nothing in return. What does the mentor get out of this deal?
Let me give you an example of this. I think, which one of my greatest fears at sea at the moment is the over-reliance on ECDIS. You know, I've seen it a few weeks back. I was out at sea, and luckily it was clear weather. And there was a VLCC 4 miles away from us, the ships I was working in STS operation. And there was a VLCC 4 miles away from us, and its AIS wasn't working. So that's its automatic identification signal. So it was not showing up on the ECDIS. And to see that vessel, you had to look in the radar or look out the bridge windows. So somebody relying on ECDIS would not have seen that vessel because it was not showing up. Now, take my ships and put them in dense fog, and you're navigating only by ECDIS. You're not going to see that VLCC. If you're not looking out the bridge windows at night and not looking at the radar, you're not going to see it. That's just one example. There are many accidents where the root cause, or one of the root causes of the accident, has been put down to over-reliance on ECDIS. So for me, the 10-minute challenge, what's in it for me is it took me 10 minutes to research accidents on over-reliance of ECDIS when I was concerned about this. I found some really fine examples of accidents that have happened because of it. And then 10 minutes just to explain to my navigation officers, you know, the dangers of this with real-time examples. And not saying that they're going to do this, but more the concept of this wouldn't happen on our ship, would it? And I put this across. It took 10 minutes. It literally does take 10 minutes. But what was in it for me? A much better night's sleep. As masters, a much better night's sleep. So there are rewards from doing this, and that's just one of many examples.
Katharine?
Kind of similarly, the idea that we're bringing up really good mariners behind us to be able to keep a really safe sea. Also, those brief moments when you reconnect with someone you've mentored in the past and you realize how much of an impact it's had on them and their career and their life, I think that's just the most rewarding feeling.
That's an interesting point, because one of the things that we're always saddled with in the maritime industry is this issue of crew retention and seafarers leaving the industry, whether they've been there for 6 months or 60 years. What impact, when mentoring is working, when it's in place and you step on board a ship and you're part of that environment, part of that culture, what impact does that have on morale and retention and happiness and professional development? How do you know that mentoring's working and that there's a culture of mentoring on board? Is that something you can observe and witness? Is it something that is declared on paper? How do you know? How do you see the benefits of mentoring when it's actually working in practice?
To me, it's a feeling. I can see it.
You can see it.
I can see it as a mooring master or pilot. I go on board the ships for 24 hours at a time, 36 hours sometimes, and I can see it happening. The master's got the second mate manoeuvring the ship, things like that. The chief mate is not stuck on the forecastle head for anchoring or for stations, because the ISM allows him to be on the bridge. And I talk so much about anchoring accidents in my book. But the chief mate's up there and he's learning the skills of being a master, while he's still got a good master with him, overseeing him and helping him and mentoring him or her. I see this, it's a culture of mentoring. And when I go on a ship and I see this in action, it's so refreshing. It's lovely to see, because people are generally happier. They're engaged. They're part of a team engaged in the operation, because there's a trust as well. Can you just slow the ship down, 2-0? And the second mate will start pulling it back. He's not pushed out of the way by the master, who then brings the telegraph back. They're part of the team. They're part of the operation. And when you see a culture of mentoring working on a ship, it really is awesome.
You can definitely see positivity. People want to come back to work. They want to come back another time.
Yeah.
They're excited. You see, the winchman might be shadowing the bosun, or the junior cadet might be shadowing the chief mate to look for something. And it's just this whole dynamic on board is very positive. There's a lot of learning, and you can tell it's working when there's things like, hey, this person got sick, they can't be on here anymore. Oh, that's fine, we'll promote up. And everybody moves up a slot and it works well. And that's because they've been able to shadow, they've been able to mentor, be a mentee, see what's happening, and can slot into that step. Obviously with a little bit of apprehension, but it is what it is. The other side to that is, you'll notice when people are being mentored, they'll grow more confident in what they're doing. Their whole demeanor changes. They might grow a little bit more mature. It depends on what your personality is, but you can see them evolving into, oh, okay, I can deal with this. I can, move forward.
Interesting. Yeah. No, that's an interesting point you make, because what I'm hearing is that when it's working and it's working well, it's tangible. You can see it, you can feel it when you walk on board or when you're working on board. And in terms of sort of making the business case for mentoring, if we were to do that, what we're saying is mentoring makes seafarers happier. Happier seafarers usually mean safer ships, and safer ships usually mean happier balance sheets. So thank you for that. We're going to have to deal with one of the things we touched on right at the top of the recording, which was the barriers to mentoring. And this is something that André, you devote an entire chapter to in the book. We know that people we work in a global industry. We know that people at sea speak different languages. We've got different genders, different cultures, different nationalities, different age groups. All of these things are on board working and living together at any one time. They naturally present barriers, or we think they might naturally present barriers. How do we deal with those barriers?
Well, first off, what we've got to remember is that things have changed at sea. Things have changed, and I mean, it's taken me 12 years to write a second edition of this book, and particularly the last 5 or 6 years, things have changed so incredibly rapidly that I've had to keep stopping and changing things, because seafaring of 5 years ago, even seafaring post-COVID, is very different to pre-COVID. the whole, what's the word I'm trying to think, you might have to help me here. It's like a feeling on board, the ethos on board has changed. Things have moved on, post-COVID, because it was such a dramatic time for us as seafarers, such really a tough time for seafarers. And we've come out stronger the other side of that. There are many barriers at sea, or perceptions of barriers. But to me, the greatest barrier on a ship is language.
Right.
And this is particularly apparent on a two-nationality ship. Mm-hmm. And again, particularly if the top 4 officers, the master, mate, chief and second, are one nationality and everybody else is another. Mm-hmm. Because you tend to find the 4 senior officers speak their language, everybody else speaks their language. They only speak to each other when they want something in a common language. And that, to me, is a really tough ship to be on, especially if perhaps you put a cadet in there of a third language, and they can have a really tough time of it. Or, it can work if everybody speaks in a common language. So we need to break down this language barrier. And to me, that's the greatest barrier to mentoring, is the language barrier. But there's many, many ways to break that down. And again, we address this in the book. A lot of people talk to me about cultural barriers, and I really would like your views on this as a new generation seafarer, because cultural barriers did exist, but now things are very, very different. And generally, and I think you may agree with this now, Stephen, the perception of cultural barriers on a ship is something that's ashore. It's not actually on the ship at all, because we're all there to do a job. We're all seafarers. We're all bonded by the sea. We all have something in common. When we're on this ship, on this adventure of carrying cargo, we have something in common, getting the ship from A to B. And culture actually, and diversity on board a ship now is actually recognized as beneficial to a team by the new generation seafarers. And this is something I've really had to change in this book, really had to address and discuss. And I'm going to be really interested to hear the feedback on this. But, what's your feelings on this? Is culture a barrier?
Yeah.
Maybe not so much in the Coast Guard.
Yeah. For me, language, obviously that's huge. Reading your book, I can definitely understand how that would be a barrier. A lot of hot topics in today's society when it comes to seafarers is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And how we can promote, because we are super cognizant, and in my workplace, how much that aids us, because everybody's coming from different perspectives and can add something different to the conversation. So I think when it comes to mentoring, I don't think that, obviously it's not a barrier, but if you're having trouble connecting mentor-mentee with someone, maybe just try and step in their shoes and see, oh, this is a woman seafarer in a male-dominated ship. Maybe I can see a little bit of why there might be trepidation in asking for this. Or, hey, this person's from this culture, or this person's seeing things, they might be young and they're trying to deal with someone much older than them. And how does that work? So just seeing things from other people's perspective, but ultimately when it comes to mentoring, I don't see it as an issue. Mm-hmm. It's just a perspective piece that people need to keep an open mind to deal with.
Mm-hmm. That really is refreshing, isn't it? To hear an answer like that. I mean, I just think that's, so great to hear how things have changed, how things have evolved really in the last 12 years between the books on board our ships. And this is what I'm seeing at sea when I'm on board ships now. This is what I'm seeing, how we acknowledge cultural difference, we acknowledge diversity, we encourage equity on board the ships. It's seen as important. And this is what people ashore have to understand, that it is important, particularly for the new generation of seafarers that have taken over, or are taking over command of the ships.
Very important, and certainly having read your book and for me being familiar with the content, I know that you deal with that quite comprehensively now in the second edition. This whole this whole new culture at sea that we're familiar with, and the barriers that used to exist, but are more perceived than real. Just moving on, and we're sort of on the home straight now. I'd like to just to question this notion that people may have out there that mentoring should be structured, long-term, involving people that are trained. The relationship should be built on trust. People should know each other. The 10-minute challenge and what we've been discussing today is not really aligning with that model. This is what we're discussing is more about short-term, unstructured experience sharing, without the need for regulation and paperwork and order. So I'm just wondering what drives that approach and how that can be successful if there's no measuring and there's no management of the measurement.
That's interesting, and of course many people argue that there should be measurement of this. If there's going to be an investment in it, then it must be measurable. But I would go back to when seafarers first went to sea, because that's when mentoring started. Historically, we've had mentoring as long as we've had seafaring. Long before we had books and we wrote about it, this is how knowledge was passed on. I did a lot of research on the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's voyage. One of my seafaring heroes, actually. And you think of life at sea in those days. Apprentices, cadets, whatever you want to call them, midshipmen, went on board the ships for years at a time, and they learnt the ropes. They were taught how to be seafarers, how to navigate ships with rudimentary, in our opinion, navigation equipment. Well, in that respect, things haven't changed. Cadets are still going on board ships to learn their trade, to learn the ropes. The thing that has changed is the ropes. And let's go on. Let's just move on 250 years from now. And, perhaps the seafarers then, because there will still be seafarers, they might be completely different if all our ships are autonomous. Our seafarers may be ashore. I don't know what's going to happen. But they're going to look back on us. And, they'll talk about us as having rudimentary equipment like DGPS and AIS and ECDIS and that. But there's going to be no different. They'll still have cadets, or whatever they call them in those days, learning the ropes. So mentoring has been here for as long as seafaring has. It's traditional, and I believe as masters of our trade, we have a tradition, that we have to adhere to pass our knowledge on.
I do think that in today's shortage of mariners globally, people are being pressured to get your sea time, get your ticket, and move up as quick as you can. And when there's so much pressure around that, yes, you gain the knowledge through doing your courses and everything else, but if you're not gaining that experiential knowledge, that mentee-mentor knowledge, then when you do get, hopscotched up the food chain like that, you will run into situations where you're not sure how to deal with them. And it's something, like personally in my own career, I've struggled with, okay, I do want to make sure I have that knowledge. So let's see who I can tap into for answers and who has that, so that when I am confronted with a similar situation, I can at least have things to pull off of, even if it's not my own experience. And I think that in itself is really key in today's day and age. And so when it comes to things like mentoring, if you're not sure how to be a mentor, but you realize the importance of the mentee side of it, maybe that's where Shoreside can say, here's some tools. If you're looking at being a mentor, this is some tools in your toolbox that you can use to be able to help facilitate that conversation, but not mandating the conversation and not mandating the training, but just giving, tools in the toolbox to help facilitate that, because it is so important as people are being pushed up the food chain faster and faster.
Right. And I think just to finish, to close out on that, when we talk about what the knowledge that we should be passing, just teach what you know. The captain on that little coaster that I worked on, he had no concept of the ships, 40-something years later that I'd be working on today's ships. Yet he taught me what he knew, and he gave me that foundation of knowledge. We just need to teach what we know now. And our new generation of seafarers will build on that and navigate into the future.
Right. And you spoke there briefly about, looking over the horizon, not perhaps so far ahead as 250 years,
No.
but maybe, let's say, in the next 12 years, the interval since the previous edition, we've been through a lot of changes in the industry in the last 12 years, and we know we've got quite an agenda in the next 12, 20, 30 years. I just wonder if you could perhaps spend a moment reflecting on not only the changes that we've seen in the last 12 and how that is reflected in the new edition and what we cover in the new edition that wasn't covered previously, but then also looking forward perhaps 12 years and maybe giving us an insight into what you'd like to see take place in the industry, in terms of mentoring and what support you'd like it to garner, and where we might be headed in terms of the content that we would hope to be writing about in the next edition of Mentoring at Sea.
I'm not clever enough to see into the future of what a ship is going to look like in 12 years' time. I don't know. Autonomy is coming on quite rapidly, but what I do know is that alternative fuels are coming in now, and we will be dealing with that because, this time next year, we're going to have many ships already running on ammonia, methanol, and the like. We're going to have to deal with that. So we're going to have seafarers on that, and we need to train new seafarers in the dangers of this and in the operation of ships. What I would like to see is 2 cadets put on every new ship that sails from now on, a minimum of 2 cadets, because a perfect time to mentor a seafarer is when they are not within the ranks of navigating officers or engineer officers or ETOs or any other category on board a ship, when they're there to train. And I think it's so terribly important that our new generation, our next generation seafarer, Generation Z, gets the opportunity to learn on board, and we do that by putting cadets on ships and mentoring them in the skills on board the ship that they're going to need. That is, we've got literally thousands of cadets globally, that hundreds and hundreds in Asia in particular, that have got their academic qualifications, but they can't get on a ship to get their 12 months sea time. It's a tragic situation, and as president of the Nautical Institute, I've done my best to encourage ships to take cadets, and I'm going to continue now as immediate past president and on into the future. Because, we look at mentoring as a means of experiential knowledge transfer, but we have to get the youngsters on board the ships to teach them, to mentor them. And that's what I want to see for the future.
Thank you. And Katharine, looking ahead?
It's hard to know how everything's going to evolve. I think you will always need to have that mentor piece, just like it's always been there in the past. It will always be there in the future. It doesn't matter how much we try and supplement that for formal teaching and how we formalize everything. And there's courses for, learning leadership and managerial skills now. There's courses for things, but a lot of these courses can't take a lot of the nuances and experiential knowledge and things like that. Regardless of how much you try and cram it into a small little classroom, you're not going to be able to cover everything. So you're always going to need to pass that on. And yes, as a cadet, you are soaking up that knowledge. So it's also, okay, we don't just need to put them on ships. We need to put them on ships and actively engage them all the time. You can't just put them on a ship and cluster them away in a cabin and say, okay, do your thing and then go back to your cabin and that's it, right? You're not going to gain a lot from that. So if we can foster that at every single level, starting with the cadets and making sure that's a great base. And then, when your level below you comes up and says, hey, do you mind showing me how to do something? Don't just be like, okay, I'm busy right now, come back, and keep waving them off. Engage them. Take that 10 minutes to show them what's happening, because then when they go up, they'll be able to take what you taught them and teach it to someone else, right? It's just...
And I think, would you agree it's an exciting future?
It is.
Yeah.
It is so exciting. And that it's a culture. It's a great culture to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've one more question to ask you both, and I'll start with you, if I may, Katharine. And this is a question which I'm sure most of our viewers will be interested in. Why should I buy this book? Now, imagine I'm a marine director of a shipping company. I really want mentoring to thrive on board. I really want to support it for my fleet, for my officers at sea and crew at sea. what is in this book that's going to help me? Why should I buy it? And why should I make sure there's a copy on every ship?
I think, in my own perspective, having just read the book, it takes a lot of concepts of things that I've thought about, not necessarily defined, and wraps them all together in a really great small read. And it really helped, I think, lay words to a lot of the things I've experienced, and that I think are important. I liked how, once I started reading it, it was really hard to put down, but it was also really well broken up into chapters. So if you don't have a lot of time, or maybe you're working ashore and only certain parts will apply to you, you can just open that chapter, read it really quickly, get a lot of good tools, because what André did is when there's sections that are really important, he will reiterate it throughout the book. So if you don't necessarily have the time or the knowledge or think it's pertinent to read the entire thing front to back, you can read a chapter and all the important pieces relating to that chapter will be in it, and you won't have to worry about, earlier or later. So I think being able to start the conversation for some companies and wanting to support it for your ships, having that and putting it on board the ship so that people can familiarize themselves with the content and realize, hey, mentoring is different than learning. Mentoring is different from coaching and teaching, and this is how it's important, and this is how we can promote it. I think that's a great place to start.
And just sort of adding to that theme, André, if I'm a master of a ship and I'm really keen to pass on that knowledge to my chief officer, to pass on that experiential learning to my chief officer, to make sure he or she doesn't make all those big mistakes in their career that maybe I made in mine, what would you say to that master about this book? What about this book would make this a must-read for them?
Well, certainly, if you want to pass on your knowledge to your chief officer, reading the book will give you guidance on how to do that. And particularly, I talk so much about chief officers being on the forecastle for stations and for anchoring. And this is the thing that generally ISM or SMS systems on board dictate. And we need to change that. I've seen first trip masters when I was a marine consultant, who'd put their ships aground, and it's a really tragic situation in the end of their careers. And that's because they didn't have the experiential knowledge of how to anchor a ship. But let me just give you an example of a master who bought my book. I didn't know anything about him. He's a member of the Nautical Institute. He bought my book, and just by absolute chance, I boarded his ship in South America to do an STS operation. I went on board, he introduced himself, and excuse me, and he said he was a member of the Nautical Institute, and we chatted, and then he said, oh, and I've got your book. And he said, I've implemented mentoring on board my ship. I thought, wonderful. Now, it just happened, we had a weather delay of a day or two, and he said, after dinner, he said, would you talk to my officers and crew about mentoring? And Captain, I'd be delighted. Every opportunity I get to talk about mentoring. So he was Greek. All his officers were Greek. He had a mixed nationality crew and one Filipino deck cadet. Anyway, we met in the mess room after dinner. I gave a presentation on mentoring. And it went down very well. The engineers bent my ears about there wasn't enough talk about engineers mentoring, and we've changed that in the new book. But then we had a Q&A session, and the Filipino cadet was there. And I asked him, I said, you're on board a ship with all Greek officers. I said, how do you get on? I said, is there a language barrier? And he said, no, sir, there isn't, because they all speak English when I'm on the bridge. And, I have to be honest, that was the end of me, because I couldn't speak because I had such a big lump in the back of my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck have just gone up again, as they always do when I tell the story. Because I'd made a difference in that young man's life, or the Nautical Institute had, because the master had read the book, and he insisted when that cadet was on the bridge, everyone spoke English, and that came directly from my first book. And it meant that the cadet wasn't socially excluded. He was engaged and he was having an absolute ball on board. We've said all along, there is no designated reward for mentoring. That wasn't designated. That was all the reward I'll ever need. And all the work I've put into the 2 books, the hundreds of hours and everything, I was rewarded that day by that cadet.
Such a heartwarming story. Well, look, that seems like the perfect note to end our conversation on. You know, a really bright, positive and thoughtful a look at what we think and what we hope lies ahead.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's been a pleasure to be here. And as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. Mentoring is so important at sea, you know, but really it's over to you now. You know, together we can make a difference.